Good day. Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Brian Nash from How We Got Here Genealogy. And I'm just starting my live stream, so you want there to just let me know where you're watching from. I'm sorry it got late. Notice I thought I had uploaded and scheduled this early in the week, but apparently it didn't save. I should say earlier in the day, not in the week. We guess earlier in the day. It was earlier in the week, but earlier today I scheduled this and it didn't save properly. And then I was busy doing a webinar at Legacy Family Trees today, so I missed noticing that this had been done. So, okay. So give me 1 second here. I'm gonna set this here. Okay. So I hope you guys all had a good week and a good time in the last little bit searching for your ancestors. I don't know how long I'll stream today. I'm actually going to switch something up. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me. Let me do this here. There we go. So I hope you guys can all hear me now. I might need to change my mic here. Yeah, I was using my camera. Let me know if you can hear me. And 1 second here. I always have some issues starting up sometimes, and I'm trying to find a few things here that I had in the past. There we go. Okay. So there we go. Now I'm going to monitor my chat. And see how this goes. Checking one thing here that I don't know if this works. I'm streaming also to Twitch for the first time ever. Not Twitch, TikTok. So I want to see if that's working on here on TikTok. So if you're watching on TikTok, just let me know. If not, well, we'll see. Nope. There we go. Okay. And it does look like it is working. Okay. So I hope, like I said, everybody hear me. I apologize there for the delay. I was a little late getting started. I wasn't sure if I was going to do this stream today. I've had a busy week, but I'll be doing another stream next Friday, and then I'll be taking a week off. So I wanted to make sure I did get this done this week. So I didn't really have anything planned, but I am here to answer any of your questions. In the chat, well, can you just let me know, did any of you catch my webinar today? If so, what did you think of it? And of course, everybody's dropping now. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay. One thing that I did do this week, it's a project I've been working on for several months. Is actually an idea for years I had in my head. And I got done my preliminary manuscript on a work of fiction, my first fictional book, and I'm going to be shopping that around to a few publishers in the near future. I'm just have a few people I've selected to sort of pre-read it and tell me what they want before I finalize it. So I hope to talk about that some more at some point in the near future, depending on the feedback I get from them, of course. Will depend on how soon I start talking about it. Okay. And I'm just checking on a few things here. A little bit of news and let me see here. There we go. Yeah, and if you do have any questions that you don't feel you want to ask in the chat, something you might have some more detailed information, do go to ask.howwegothere.ca and you can, there's a form there and you can fill that out and answer, request a question. So let me see here. Which reminds me, I need to check this out. Okay. So I do have a few questions here. Actually, I have one that was just asked recently. Okay. My screen is overloaded with things today, so I apologize for this, the distraction. I really don't mean to be distracted here, but it's just there's a couple things coming up, particularly a client I'm working on. He's looking for some information. It's a really interesting story, one I would love to share, and the client has said that I can in the future. I'm hoping to share it possibly as a long form video. So okay. I'm just going here to, I'm losing my spot where I'm at. You can hear me? Great. Yeah, it's funny, when I was doing the tests for the to go onto the webinar this afternoon, they had problems picking up my mic for whatever reason, but I think it did improve because it did not sound like anybody had any issues hearing me. Well, I was more afraid of of that probably than anything else. Technical difficulties could happen. I tested that earlier in the day on another site, and the audio was working perfectly, so I was kind of confused why it initially said it was having some errors. Well, not errors, it just had my volume really low. In the end, I was afraid I talked too fast, and I wound up being longer than I had intended. So, and it's great to have you here as always. One of my regulars that I can count on showing up just about every week. Okay. Boom. Boom. Okay. So yeah, this is meant to be just a general Q&A. So if there's any questions, ask them in the chat. Like I said, I didn't necessarily prepare anything specific today because I wasn't positive if this was going to still happen. So I'm rethinking the whole game show idea. I really do like that concept, but it's just trying to make it work right in a way that engages you as a viewer and is productive to me. Let me see here. And I need to stop that glow on my head. That's not very pleasant. Let's see here. That's not quite what I was hoping for. Now all you can see is the ring light in my glasses. If I point up a certain way, it's kind of weird. One second. So I was actually had a really productive week, I think. Amongst other things, I was engaged in some work with the museum that I'm part of the board. They've been putting on a summer series, and they had a really great history circle on Monday. I'll link that here in the chat in a second, the site. And if you, I'll just link their YouTube page. The topics they spoke about this year, there are more of a local interest. There are some interesting things, and there's actually a video on the 150th birthday of Lucy Maud Montgomery. So I'm gonna, like I said, add this into the chat here. So what steps would you? Okay, this is actually a really good question. It's a little bit different on both of them. And the first thing is, if you know you have ancestors that had immigrated to Canada, it's finding out if you know where they immigrated to Canada. This one of the key factors that will sometimes determine that in both cases will be whether they were Protestant or Catholic, because you'll find different sets of records. One of the hardest things with Scottish and Irish people, if you're looking at records before 1867, really actually a little while after that, to be honest, you're probably not going to find a lot of immigration records specifically for those people, because they were British citizens, and they were citizens of the United Kingdom, and basically they were going to a different province within the United Kingdom. Until 1867, there wasn't really no Canadian citizenship, and it wasn't really at the 1820s when it was completely separated. So if you were going from your own country to your own country, there's not a lot of records kept. That'd be like in the United States, if you went from Massachusetts to New Hampshire, there's not records of you crossing the border, because the border is not for citizens of your own country, really. They're just political units within the country. So it does get hard. But one of the things is knowing the religion helps. If you know anything about them in Scotland or Ireland, that can definitely help as well, because often people, when they immigrated, they carried on trades that were the same or adjacent. So that will make some determinations of where they might have possibly immigrated to within Canada. Obviously, you know their things like their names, doing some searches. If you have some good information, the Canadian Census is probably one of the places I would honestly first start, if you just have general information that you know they were Canadian in Canada, and especially if they're in that period in the post-Canadian Confederation, pre-World War II. If you might be able to find them in there. If they were in Canada in 1901, that's a really great place to start. It's one of the best censuses there is, because it actually has the name, the date of birth, the month and the day. And for the most part, it's accurate. Again, it all depends what the person that was the informant who was stating it did, but that's a really good source. If you already know that information, say from a death record you have elsewhere, that's a good way of confirming that is your relative. This is a case that's actually really common within New England
and Atlantic Canada. There's a lot of cross-border immigration early post-World War II, and even early in the 20th century. So, and late in the 19th century. So you if you can know they were in Canada at some point, I would, and you're not sure where, I would search the census. If they were in Canada in 1901, I would search and you know their birth date from a death record, maybe in the United States, I would definitely start with that census, just because it's a great place to it's a great place to start, because it will help nail things down. And that point, once you have that, you can start tracing. You'll have their parents' names, etc. Hopefully, and you'll be, if they're living with their parents at that time. Like I said, it depends when they immigrate. In Canada, you can go, the current most recent census you have access to is 1931. Unfortunately, 1901 is the only one that gives the exact date of birth. Other census, they either ask the age of the person at the time of the census that was taken. After 1921, it was always, it was done for a long time in April. That's all the British colonies sort of agreed at one point to have their censuses done at the same point. It did change later. I think now the census is in June. So, but yeah, if you know the period they were in Canada, and if depending, if you know the region they went to, that will make a difference. The religion is great, because I find often a lot of the church records have more information than you'll get from any government records, especially when you start looking at where a person's from in Scotland, Ireland originally. Because the main case I see when people are doing that is if they've moved on from Canada and they've moved usually to the States, but could be anywhere, could be Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, generally probably English-speaking countries, but not necessarily. But yeah, church records are great. Canadian census, I would definitely, it's a go-to. It can be frustrating searching the Canadian census. Part of it is, well, first of all, a lot of the Canadian census, there's a bias of whoever was the person taking the census in the community, especially with Scottish relatives. The mix and the max will be confused, and and you'll see it will change from one census year to the next. Within that 10 years, you'll have people that were max and are now mixed, so it's not consistent. In 1921, I found a whole census area, and that instead of putting the Mac or the Mick before, the person decided to put that as the first part of their given name. So if they were John McKay, their name was K, last name was K, and their given name was Mick John, which does not make sense at all. So yeah. There's unfortunately, it's hard to search for those type of things, and with the Canadian census, I find their use of wildcards isn't as good, or as some other places that I've searched records on. And this transcription, a lot of the times there's mistakes, and you can report them, and I don't know how often they look at them, because there's a few mistakes that I've reported with my family that I still see there. For instance, the whole family name's spelled wrong. They have Nash spelled N-A-C-H. In the actual, I can see from the writing that where the person may have interpreted the S as a C, but it's not. I provided other documents that show the same family members in through birth records, etc. And I've done that a couple years ago, and I've done it again more recently, and I'm still finding that mistake in there. So it's getting those things. Yeah, it's more the information you already have going in. Like no matter where you're searching, you're going to be better equipped to go and look for your relatives, whether they're Scottish, Irish, German, Polish. Yeah, it can get complicated sometimes. And you learn with different things. Like even there's places in the Canadian census where you can put the community names, and you might find it's consistent in one census, but the next census you go and you try to use that community name, even though the community still exists, it doesn't find it, just because the way the person who wrote down it did not record that specific community name. They took the wider general area as the name. And that is a big thing with Canada, particularly Atlantic Canada. There was a historian actually won presentations recently at that site I had posted, that he was talking about Canada post 18. They were looking at the 1871 census and following census, and they're trying to do analyze the information based on community. And the problem was, in Atlantic Canada, the sense of community can be very different from one person to the next, to which community they belong to. And I experienced this in my own life when I lived in Nova Scotia. The first house we bought was in a place, well, there wasn't really a community name there. My deed had one thing, my power bill said another, and actually my deed just said at or near Lakeville. Didn't give it the name of the community as Lakeville. My power bill said one thing, my phone bill said one thing, my the cable company gave it a completely different community name. I went and I asked my two neighbors, and they were in-laws. The sister's husband, and then the brother was my next door neighbor. Across the street lived his sister with her husband. I asked her husband. He gave me the name of one place, and his brother-in-law, who lived across the street, who was next door to me, gave a completely different community. So there is that sometimes even knowing the community, it can really not be helpful. And then if you throw that in with names that are biased, knowing even some occupations, and I found that some occupations where it's the same in one census, then the next census is different, the next census is the same, and there's no indication that the person changed job, but for whatever reason, I don't know if the person that they got it from didn't know the family at that time is like what their actual job was, or maybe the person taking the census just basically gave them a more general name. Yeah, it is hard to locate sometimes some people when you are looking. The big thing is perseverance. That's why often church records are better, because churches generally take, if you know where they lived in the general area, often, particularly Catholic churches, the archdiocese kept most of the records. They do have parish records, but there's usually some type of diocese or archdiocese records that can narrow it down a little for you. And Not all of those are available. It depends where in Canada and what they have available. Yeah, it was hard for people trying to find my home. Even where I live in Prince Edward Island now, it's really hard because if you use Google Maps and you put my address, what it actually is, it points to a different road that's just um, almost parallel to the road I live on, but you can't find it correctly unless you know the specific way that they have it listed. Um, Prince Edward Island is interesting because originally Prince Edward Island was broken up into what are called lots where they had absentee landlords. So if you happen to know a lot number that originally was, some things are still listed as that, even modern day. Though different community, you can find it by knowing the lot number. It was to find my house was actually fairly easy. Um, once they were on the road, but to tell people the community was just really hard. Luckily, with community names, I haven't found too many, and surprisingly, not too many examples when they do have a community name that there are multiple spellings. I'm sure there are, I just haven't come across. But I have come across where they definitely have community names is different. And again, it depends on the individual too. If you would ask them where they lived, it was actually the 1970 census the person did the study for, not the 1870, where they took all this information to look at where people were. That when they hit the Maritimes, there was overlapping. Though you, like I said, you have examples of your next door neighbors. One would tell you one community, one was another. A lot of it depended on how they felt and how they thought of community. Because there's a lot of unincorporated communities within Atlantic Canada. So they're not a town, not a village. They're just a name on the map that people gather around and you use. And so a lot of it could be, depending on the person and who their association was with and what type of activities they were doing, what community they actually felt part of. They've started putting up signs in most places, but sometimes in some places that's still there's one place I know in Prince Edward Island on our way home from church every week. We always notice there's about a half a kilometer on one side has the name of one community, and when you're coming the other way, it has the name of the community you're going into. There's about half a kilometer in between where they don't appear to be in any community. So you have some anomalies like that still. So anybody else have any other questions? I'm, like I said, not really doing anything specific other than just answering any questions you might have today. Again, let me know if you caught me on my webinar today, if you happen to join in that, Legacy Family Trees. And if it was it your first time being exposed to me? If it was, I appreciate your comments. The Canadian Library of Archives do have a set of immigration records. Let me just see if I can share them here. 1 second. So here is the site. I'm going to share my screen in a second. So here's the government website where they keep the immigration records. In here, they'll definitely tell you some of the issues that they have with in regards to this. So one place that if they came to Canada between 1928 and 1971, and they came by boat, they most likely, if they're coming from Europe, most likely landed, not necessarily, but most likely landed at Pier 21 in Halifax. The Canadian National Museum of Immigration is there, and they actually have a whole genealogy department within the museum there that work with people specifically to find not just their immigration records, but any records, but they really specialize in finding a lot of these immigration records. In 1935 is sort of right now where passenger lists are available. Again, and there's other sources you'll find them as well, depending on where they're coming from. There's Ship's List, which is a website that has a lot of different lists here. And unfortunately, with a lot of these records here, they're not available online. But it'll give you some information because they are indexed, so you can find the records and then request them. So you can actually find from 1608 to 1760 French records, and from 1760 to 1865 British records. You have other ones by port, and you have border entries. So there's a few different things that places you can find different things. Again, some of the things is if they're coming from the United Kingdom anywhere, they might show up in passenger list, but they're probably not going to show up in anything that would be in regards to immigration. Even cross-border, there's a lot of the border entries, there won't be any, the information was just missing because, there's some areas where their towns are right on the border, so people cross back and forth quite frequently, so they weren't as diligent in keeping records in general. And it was more if the person was going to be moving on a more permanent basis that they actually wound up gathering any records. If they came by boat, there's usually good records. And again, that would, depending where they're coming from, if they're and where they're going to. If they're going to the United States and crossing the border, you'd look at where you'd look for your American records. Knowing the places, if they were going by ship and they were from Canada and they were going and landing on Eastern United States, they most likely either left from Halifax, Montreal, or Quebec City, possibly St. John, New Brunswick. And then if you get into Newfoundland, which up until 1949 was completely separate from Canada, you'll have different records as well of people there. They won't show as being Canadian, they would show as being British because it was a colony and self-governing colony that went through different stages where it sort of was independent, then managed by the British government again, then eventually in 1949 they joined Canada. So you get into a lot of, if you don't know the specifics where they came from, you can have problems, because you might be looking for a John Smith that you're expecting to see his country of origin is Canada, but he was actually from Newfoundland, so it's not going to say the country of origin as being Canada, because before 1949 it was not part of it. So again, it is very, very limited. There are some really good sources for loyalists that are available here. And part of that is because there is a lot of them got, most of them should have gotten some type of land grant when they came to Canada. So yeah, the Library of and Archives Canada is a great place to start for a lot of things. Their immigration records, you'll find they are wanting. I find sometimes I find things on other sites that you would think would be listed on the Canadian site. The archives, they just have not used that passenger list or have access to it. That they so let's see here. There we go. So that's one place I would start. Local histories, though, this is really good. There are a lot of local histories I know in Eastern Canada, particularly. There are a lot of detailed histories of communities where you'll be able to find your ancestors mentioned, because a lot of these communities were small at that time, so there's information recorded about the different residents. Again, it depends on the different provinces. They're depending on when they came into Confederation. If they're one of the original four, they'll often still have keep a lot of the records pre-Confederation in their own provincial records. They're never transferred as national records, such as land grants, etc. Western Canada, you generally have that. You'll have a lot of land grant records before provinces were incorporated as separate provinces, because they were all out west, because they were all part of what's called Northwest Territories, they called it at that time, which basically included most of Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, northern Quebec, northern British Columbia, modern day Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and Yukon Territory. So basically, places that weren't a province and weren't part of Newfoundland. So it's really in the 20th century that the provincial borders sort of developed to what they are known today. So yeah, you'll often find it hard to because if you think about it, Northwest Territories, even today, is a large territory, but it incorporated all these other regions. And then if you know where it is today, often you will find like areas of Alberta communities. You'll find their records. Alberta does have them. That's sort of was passed along, so you can look there. Not all the provinces, colonies before they joined Confederation did regular censuses, or if they are, the records aren't always complete. Somehow people back in the 1800s they didn't take into consideration that somebody 2 centuries later is going to be wanting to find out who their great grandfather is and find as much information as they want about them. So they didn't take care to preserve them. They didn't take care to print neatly and accurately the information necessarily all the time. So I've been going 45 minutes. We'll do about 15 more. I'll go to a quarter after the hour. If there's any questions, anything anybody would like, I will be doing this again next Friday. I'll try to make sure I get it posted earlier in the week for notification. If you're watching this on the replay, do make sure you let me know in the comments. I do tend to get a lot of these videos. People do watch the replay, and they tend to watch quite a bit of it. Okay. I'm drinking out of my I love my Scottish ancestry mug, available through my store, which there should be a link in my YouTube page. Okay. Yes. There's definitely a historic context in the sense that they're both Celtic. Their language origin would be very similar. There doesn't seem to be as much Welsh immigration as there are. I don't know if it's just because the population size is smaller, but often, especially people in more industry related, for instance, mining, often there's overlapping community. And there's not as many Welsh communities in Canada, but so these people, they would tend to go, like I said, depending what their occupation was, there'd be some overlap there. So at that point, you're gonna get some mingling of the families and cultures, which is great. Helps cut down on endogamy. So adds a new flavor to the mix. So there is that, and a lot of that has to do, at least from my understanding of it, would be because of the type of communities they were going to and leaving from. There would be some commonality, and it's interesting because both of them weren't Irish. Taking the other Celtic population that came from there, and often Irish people would claim not to be Irish. They would either say they were English. If they were Ulster Scots, they would just say they were Scottish. I haven't had a personal example in my family history of the people claiming to be Welsh, but I can see, especially if you where there's people that might not have been as familiar with the Welsh accent, they might have been able to pull it off, possibly. But I do think that a lot of the connection probably has to do with more of the industry. because they, if you're a miner, and again, because there's no large Welsh communities, at least not in Canada, if you are a miner from Wales and you're probably going to go to a mining area in Canada, possibly, if you want to, you might feel that's where you have the best chance at gaining employment. And there was a lot of Scottish miners that did the same thing. They were the backbone of these mining communities, particularly in Nova Scotia. That's the case, but I know out west as well. That a lot of them, other types of mines, there was a lot of Scottish people that were part of that. So you would have that natural connection there. Okay. Okay, so I got about 7 minutes left. Let's see here. And I was mentioning that I completed a novel I've been writing for I want to say the last 4 months. I've sort of been getting it all into a proper story form. I've had this concept, I want to say almost 20 years since I first moved to Prince Edward Island. So it's a work that I've been sort of playing around with in my mind, and that I finally decided to put everything together and make into a cohesive story. Yeah, that definitely could give you a clue. It could also be that often it can be as simple as there was a lot of immigration from Scotland, so there was a lot of ships leaving from Scotland, and if they were planning to come to North America, that could be the port that they went to. There could be other family connections in the United Kingdom that sort of are underlying as well, depending on what their family did in the United Kingdom. Yeah, it's gone to. I have a few people I've sent it to read it, to preliminary review and read it, give me suggestions, and then I'm going to be looking for some input and finalizing it to submit it to some publishers. So how I found any connections between the Campbells and the Pictish? Well, I do have Campbells in my tree. Pictish is really, most Celts at one point were Picts or Gaels. The way their heritage goes. There's a book I recommend reading. this one here, it's by, he's called the Venerable Bede, so that means I think he's just not quite a saint in the Catholic Church eyes. This book was written, I want to say, the 8th century. Yeah, it's the 8th century. So it gives a really interesting history of the people. As far as specific connections, I'm sure if, depending on the line of Campbell, if you were able to get records that can trace them back, you would find that there probably is some connection. Yeah, but this book here, really, really good. This was, I think, a book I had to read my second year university for my medieval England course. I studied medieval history, university, and medieval studies. Had a lot of interesting courses, including I had one course in medieval philosophy. There was 4 students in it, and we used to meet at, the professor was one of the dons in my university, so we'd meet in his room, and he would be washing his dishes while he taught us. So that was quite an interesting experience. But it was that was a medieval philosophy course, so that was very, it was a closed group of people really took medieval studies. They kind of ended the program, and I just wound up taking courses from it. So. Well, I don't know about that and what I think about that as far as past lives, but I do, there is definitely that connection to the Celts, the Picts. They're often interchanged. Yeah, this book, it's worth reading it. You can probably find it very used. It's a common book. It's old. There's some of the stuff that's, if you read modern reviews, that yeah, definitely counter what it says, but it's one of the earliest written documents on Great Britain, the British Isles. So it's worth reading. It's definitely framed from his perspective and what the church and the greater church wanted to have people know at that time. Yeah, I can understand that. I get chills when I see anything that is that old and that is still connected. There's still that connection there to you, because it's part of it's part of your history, of your or potentially part of your history of your family. No problem. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. And I'm assuming you're talking about Inverness in Scotland, not Inverness in Cape Breton. Both have a lot of stones. Yeah, definitely the book is worth ordering. It's really good. I probably should put my Amazon link to the book in here, but I just wasn't intending on showing this today. But just, yeah, it's that question does evoke that. It's hard to, when you talk about families in a very general sense, especially when you're talking about Scottish families, because you have families that have the same surname, same clan name. They're not necessarily connected, or you have to go way back to find the connection. Yeah, I didn't think it would be much. I think, what did I purchase it for? $7.95 Canadian back in, I'm going to give away my age probably, back in 1989. So, yeah, it probably hasn't changed much. If not a new version, I imagine. It's an interesting read. It's a little hard. I had my medieval history professor who taught this in a medieval Europe course. He was a little eccentric, so to speak, and our history. This particular course, when we're reading this, the history of medieval England, well, actually medieval Britain. He was reading through this book to us one day, and our course, there was only 8 of us in the class, so we met in the history house in one of the boardrooms, and there was these 2 ceiling fans that were above the boardroom table. And my professor one day, while reading the book, stopped, looked up, stared at the fans for, it seemed it must have been 5 minutes, and he was British himself. He said, I've never seen them go that bloody fast before, and then picked up right where he left off. Same professor one day, we were in a larger class, a medieval Europe class. I think there was, 60 students in that class in that lecture, because it was a more general history course that anybody who's doing European history probably would have taken, where the medieval England was either people specifically concentrating medieval history or English history, so a smaller pool, so to speak. Anyways, he was lecturing, and he stopped again in the middle of speaking. He goes, I left my hat at the bank, and left. Never said a word. Me and my friend waited about 5 minutes, looked at each other, and said, let's go play pool. So we did. I don't know if he ever returned. I think a couple of people did wait to see if he did. So historians can be an odd lot, especially medieval historians, I find. And I'm not just saying that because I guess technically, since that's what I'm studied, that's what I am. But I'm more of a historian in recent years of general Canadian history and Scottish and Irish history, but a lot of history. I really try to study the history of the immigrant populations as they came over to North America, Australia, and what sort of drove that. Partially because that's the connection to my own family, but it's really fascinating things that cause people to move. No. Now, probably I have in reading materials, reading about particular archaeological finds, but nothing specifically. Yes, I definitely think that most of my family that arrived here from Scotland came as a direct result of the clearances, or as in one particular family's location situation. It was an after effect of the clearances, in the sense they left their ancestral clan area and had moved to more urban Scotland, and then eventually came to Canada. But most of the other the rest of my Scottish family did come because of the clearances. It's it's really interesting because they then in family history and passed down oral history. It isn't always, they never necessarily called them the clearances. I was talking to a good friend that I had on my podcast a while back, and I was just recently talking to him again as we prepare to do a future episode, and he was relating part of the family story. He said, it was simply passed down that their family was kicked off the farm so they could for sheep, but it didn't necessarily call it the clearances. And a lot of times, I think people want to put that kind of history behind them, probably in the first generation or two, because they've made a new start, and a lot of people, it was really a benefit. It's for instance, my ancestors, a lot of them, the first time they could actually dream of land ownership. Um, my friend that I was talking to, he actually used to be the leader of the opposition in Nova Scotia, and that would be the way our parliamentary system works. Americans would be like the leader of the minority government in the minority party in Congress. So he was the leader, and his family that came over here in the 1840s because of the clearances. When he looked back at their documents of their land grant, they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they put their mark. And it was only a couple generations later that not only that his family was established, and here was a person that was prominent in politics, prominent in business, and if they had stayed in Scotland, probably not. They were croft farmers. If they continued that, what would have happened? The ancestor that came over here, owned land right away, but she never would have gotten Scotland. So it's one of those. It's a tragic piece of history, but it had a really happy ending. And I always think one of the most ironic things is a lot of people that were cleared wound up going to New Zealand and Australia. And they were cleared so they could put sheep on their ancestral lands, and it was only a generation or two after that New Zealand became the largest exporter of sheep and sheep products in the world, overtaking Scotland. So the people that were hoping to make a lot of money off the sheep, actually, they wound up in a lot of cases stopping shortly after. Definitely by the turn of the 20th century, a lot of places were no longer sheep farms. There are still sheep farms, obviously, in Scotland. It's still an important part of their diet traditionally, but they're hoping the British nobles who schemed to try to make more money wound up not doing very well in the sheep trade. I'm probably not the first person you've met that has a connection, because, or seen, anybody that has Scottish ancestry in Canada, most likely, and if they came before the turn of the 20th century, most likely came because of the clearances, either, like I said, directly or indirectly. Yeah, it's not actually that crazy. Even in my lifetime, there were a lot of people that were just a few years older than me, that the whole areas, they really had not very high literacy rates because they worked the farms. It's what happened was a lot of these families, they could only send their kids to school part time of the year because they were busy planting or harvesting. In Prince Edward Island, there's actually periods where they would specifically have no school because it was it was either potato planting or potato harvesting time. So there was, where that was the major industry of the people in these parochial schools, just wasn't it wasn't worth them having school if almost all your students are not going to be there, particularly male students. So my granduncle, by marriage, he had a grade 3 education, and because he went to, his father had died when he was young, and he went to work in the coal mines just after grade 3, grade 4. He was actually one of the smartest men I knew because he was very self-taught. He read every book in his town's library, to the point that he was reading Harlequin romances because there was nothing else left to read. He ate up reading, and like he was starving on a tropical island and needed the subsistence. Were the clearances called that? Not necessarily. You would hear there was occasions where they would talk about this, but to use that as a wide term, I don't think it became prominent until after it happened. Though people would say they were cleared, calling the Highland Clearances or the Scottish Clearances, I think that happened much later. But historians generally referred to. I mean, was World War I called World War I in 1918, 1920? And no, it was called the Great War until the Second World War. And I don't know what they called the Second World War at the time, if they called World War II, or it wasn't until afterwards that they decided it was World War. So it's yeah, I actually was talking to a person just at church. They're a couple years older than me. They attended a one-room schoolhouse in PEI until they were in grade 8, I think they said. And I know when I lived in Nova Scotia, there was some communities that had a 1 or 2 room schoolhouse. But what happened is they usually only taught 1 or 2 grades, and some of the other 1 and 2 room schoolhouses would teach other grades. So instead of just taking everybody from that community to that one school, they would be bused to different places, but they still utilized the old buildings. Yeah, there's our remote areas in Canada. There used to be, you can find some documentaries on the train school. Basically, where the teachers come in some of these northern Ontario communities and northern Alberta, British Columbia, Northwest Territories, where they come and be once a month. They basically come by train, and the teacher would teach, give them all the information they need, provide them all their lessons, and come back the next month and gather the information and go and mark it, and that would be the next month they'd get that. So it's really not that distant of a phenomenon that from us. Yeah, that's actually very common as well. High school was where we take it for granted. I know in my generation, it was taken for granted that you'd go to high school and hopefully you would graduate. My father never graduated high school because he joined the military, and at 17 years old, and that's where he finished his education. It didn't help that he was in grade 10, I think, 3 times, maybe grade 11 for once. Yeah, a lot of those Pictish and other old stones and is just amazing. I always like the joke that comes around daylight savings times, where somebody has doctored up a picture of them loading some of the stones from Stonehenge onto a truck, and they they point out, oh, we're just setting Stonehenge back for daylight savings time. It is amazing that these people that in a lot of ways we would consider very primitive, but they had that technology. A lot of them understood the stars and the season better than we do now, because it was such an important part of their culture. It drove their year. They had to rely on that, and the work that they did was amazing. Yeah. I always like the Spinal Tap's Stonehenge in that movie. I always thought that was my favorite movie that references Stonehenge. Okay, so I did go a little longer than I thought, but thank you guys for the great questions. Join me again. I'll be here next week about the same time, 6:15 Atlantic. That's 5:15 Eastern. Depending where you are, there's some great tools that you can use to find exactly. But I usually try to, by Tuesday or Wednesday, not always, post set up when I'll be there. So if you ring the bell and make sure you get notifications and subscribe, you will get notified of you should. You should, for the most part, get notified of when my live streams are. They usually around the same time. The week after next, I will be away, so I will not be doing a live stream that week. I'll be away for the whole week, so it probably won't be until sometime the week after. Okay, well, you're very welcome. I love talking about history, love talking about genealogy. It's really important to me that people they start to understand history, and they start to they develop a love for it, because I'm a person that very strongly believes that if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. And also, if you don't know history, you have the wrong concepts of history, and you take the wrong lessons from history because you haven't investigated yourself. And so it's really important. Understanding your own genealogy and your own family's history is a great way to explore history, because you know what, it really does make it personal. Because when you start finding your great grandfather, your second great grandfather, you find out where they lived and when they lived. You may not find a lot of details about their individual life, but it gets you curious about what was happening in the community, what's happening in the world at that time, what kind of things influenced them. Because the things that influence them, you'll find that influenced you, whether you know it or not. For instance, the Highland Clearances that affected my ancestors from Scotland, the potato famine that affected my father's side is all Irish, that affected them. You know that I might not ever think of it, but it's why I'm in Canada, why I'm in North America, why I've had opportunities that I had that I would not necessarily had from birth if that hadn't happened. The fact that they survived these things and came through it, all affects who I am today. And you guys all have a great weekend. And keep searching for your answers. You'll find them wherever you are. I think next week I'm going to do more of the QA. I have a couple of things I'm going to hopefully be able to focus on. Oh, and if you haven't got a chance, check out if you the webinar I did earlier today. Hopefully you get a chance to enjoy it. I put a link on my post page recently this afternoon, just shortly after it was done, where it's free until August 8th to go and watch it. There's also a discount code there for legacy webinars if you're not a member currently. So you have a great day.